Right now, somewhere in your neighborhood, a homeowner is getting a quote for a roof replacement that could have been prevented with a bag of white powder that costs less than a fast food meal. That is not a hypothetical. That is happening today, tomorrow, and every single day across every city in this country. And the only reason it keeps happening is because almost nobody knows what you are about to find out. The average full roof replacement in America costs somewhere between $9,000 and $30,000, depending on the size of the home. The biological process that drives a significant portion of those replacements costs about $1 to stop before it ever starts. $1 versus $20,000. That gap does not exist because the cheap solution does not work. It exists because the cheap solution works extraordinarily well, and that creates a very specific kind of problem for a very specific group of people who make their living when your roof fails. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, because before you can appreciate why this matters, you need to understand what is actually happening on your roof right now, today, whether you can see it or not. Most homeowners think of moss as an aesthetic issue. You see the green patches spreading across the north-facing slope and you think your house looks a little neglected. Maybe you think about cleaning it up someday. What you do not think about, because nobody ever tells you, is what is happening underneath those green patches at a structural level that cannot be seen from the driveway. Moss is not like dirt or leaves sitting on top of a surface. It is a living organism that physically anchors itself into your shingles using microscopic thread-like structures that wedge into the pores and seams of the asphalt surface. As the colony expands, those structures push deeper, lifting shingle edges away from the layer beneath them. Water finds those gaps. In climates where temperatures drop below freezing, that trapped water expands and contracts with every cycle, widening the damage a little more each time. After 2 or 3 seasons of this, the waterproofing layer underneath the shingles begins to saturate. The wooden deck underneath that layer begins to absorb moisture, and by the time you finally notice something is wrong, the structural damage is already done. The roofer who shows up to give you an estimate is not creating a problem. He is simply the first person to show you a problem that has been quietly developing for years, while the solution sat on a shelf at your local garden center for $1 a bag. Now stay with me here, because what actually happens when this particular powder contacts living moss tissue is something most people have never been told, and it changes the way you see the entire problem. The powder in question is zinc sulfate monohydrate. It is a white crystalline compound sold at garden centers and hardware stores across the country. It has no smell, no color on surfaces, no complex application process. You sprinkle it dry along the peak of your roof. Then you wait for rain. When rainfall hits the powder, it dissolves the zinc particles into solution and carries that solution downward across every shingle on both slopes of the roof. What happens next operates at a cellular level. Zinc ions attach themselves to proteins inside the moss cells, disrupting the biological processes that allow the organism to maintain its own structure. The cell walls begin to break down. The moss loses its ability to retain moisture. From the outside, you start to see the green color fading to brown over the course of a week or two. Within 3 weeks under normal rainfall conditions, the colonies die completely. Then rain does the cleanup for you, washing the dried material off the surface naturally. You do not scrub. You do not rinse. You do not climb onto the roof at any point. One application under typical conditions provides protection against regrowth for up to 2 years. That is the entire system. White powder, ridgeline, rainfall, done. And here is the part that makes this history so remarkable. Because human beings figured out the core principle behind this solution centuries before anyone understood the science explaining why it worked. In medieval Scandinavia, builders noticed something that had no explanation at the time. Structures topped with copper roofing material stayed free of moss and organic growth for generations, while every wooden and stone building around them turned green within a few years. The parishioners who maintained these churches wrote about it. The craftsmen who built them passed the observation along. Nobody understood the mechanism. They simply knew that copper and biological growth did not coexist on rooftops. Then, in the 19th century, a French physician began investigating why workers in copper processing facilities had dramatically lower rates of infection and disease during epidemic periods than the surrounding population. His research, which he presented to the French Academy of Sciences in the 1860s, demonstrated that copper had a measurable lethal effect on organic pathogens, even in microscopic concentrations. A few decades later, a Swiss botanist gave this phenomenon its scientific name and identified zinc alongside copper as one of the two most potent naturally occurring antimicrobial metals. Even a few dissolved ions in ordinary water, he demonstrated, could destroy colonies of algae, mold, fungi, and microorganisms without any further human intervention. That knowledge shaped the architecture of important buildings for the next century. Copper roofing became standard on government buildings, cathedrals, and universities, not as decoration, as preservation. Some of those roofs are still standing today, still clean, still functioning, without a single moss treatment in their entire lifespan. Meanwhile, the average asphalt shingle roof in America is designed to last 15 to 25 years under ideal conditions, and moss damage is one of the primary reasons those roofs fail before that window closes. There is a moment in this story where something shifts, and it is worth being honest about what caused that shift without overstating it. The roofing contractor industry in the United States generates over $76 billion annually, and a significant majority of that revenue does not come from new construction. It comes from replacement and renovation of roofs that have already failed. That is not an accusation. That is simply the economic structure of the industry. And within that structure, a compound that costs $1 and prevents the biological degradation that drives a large share of premature roof failures does not generate the kind of recurring revenue that sustains professional service businesses. A zinc sulfate application that works for 2 years means no professional cleaning visit that year and no professional cleaning visit the following year either. A zinc or copper strip installed along the ridgeline at a one-time cost of around $150 releases protective ions with every rainfall for 3 to 5 years, sometimes longer. There is no maintenance contract attached to a strip of metal tucked under a shingle. There is no upsell opportunity. There is no annual return visit. The economics of prevention and the economics of treatment are not aligned, which means the information ecosystem that reaches most homeowners is built around the second category, not the first. Professional cleaning services charge between $500 and $1,000 per visit for results that typically last about 12 months before growth returns. That is $1,000 every 2 years for a temporary solution to a problem that a permanent solution addresses for $1 and zero follow-up. The math is not complicated. The reason most homeowners have never done the math is that nobody in a position to profit from that math has had any incentive to share it with them. But here is something you should know before we go any further, because there is a mistake that millions of homeowners make every year that actively destroys the very roof they are trying to protect, and it is so widely practiced that most people assume it must be the correct approach. The visual logic of pressure washing a mossy roof feels sound. Blast the growth off with high-pressure water. The surface looks clean, problem solved. What actually happens is considerably worse than the moss itself. Asphalt shingles are coated with ceramic granules that protect the underlying material from ultraviolet radiation and temperature extremes. Those granules are the entire reason asphalt shingles have a lifespan measured in decades rather than years. A pressure washer strips those granules off the surface on every pass. The raw asphalt underneath is then exposed directly to sunlight, rain, and thermal cycling. It cracks, blisters, and breaks down at a rate that can take years off the rated life of the roof in a single afternoon of cleaning. And here is the detail that makes this genuinely maddening. Virtually every major shingle manufacturer includes an explicit clause in their warranty stating that pressure washing voids coverage entirely. The most popular cleaning method that homeowners reach for when they see moss on their roof cancels the warranty protection, strips the protective granule coating, and accelerates the failure of the shingles, all while creating the appearance of cleaning. Nobody at the hardware store mentions this when you rent the equipment. Nobody in most contractor consultations brings it up unprompted. The method that feels correct is actually one of the most destructive things you can do to an asphalt roof. Now you know that. And knowing it changes what you reach for when you see green patches spreading across your slope. The step-by-step reality of the zinc sulfate approach is almost absurdly simple compared to what most people imagine roof maintenance requires. You do not need specialized equipment. You do not need to hire anyone. You do not need to set foot on the roof at all. Go to a hardware store or garden center and look for zinc sulfate monohydrate powder. A 3-pound bag at current retail prices costs somewhere between $1 and $3. For a standard residential roof of 1,500 to 2,000 square feet, you will need roughly 6 to 9 pounds total. Wait for a stretch of dry weather with no rain expected for at least 48 hours. Use a long-handled garden scoop or a plastic cup attached to an extension pole and sprinkle the dry powder evenly along the ridgeline, the peak of the roof, at roughly 3 pounds per 600 square feet of surface area. Then you stop. You wait for the next natural rainfall. Rain dissolves the zinc, carries it downward across every shingle on both sides of the roof, and the chemistry takes care of everything else over the following 2 to 3 weeks. Brown patches where green ones used to be. Dead material washing away on its own. 2 years of protection from one 10-minute application. If you want a longer-term permanent solution, zinc or copper strips installed along the ridgeline under the top row of shingles release the same protective ions continuously with every rainfall. A zinc strip installation runs about $150 for a standard home. The protection it provides for the following 3 to 5 years replaces professional cleaning visits that would cost anywhere from $1,500 to $5,000 over the same period. The shingle manufacturers have already proved that this works at scale. Some premium product lines include copper-infused granules directly in the shingle material during manufacturing at virtually no additional cost per unit. Those lines market themselves on their resistance to algae staining. The standard product lines sold to the majority of the market contain no antimicrobial protection at all, despite the fact that adding it would cost pennies per shingle. The decision to leave standard shingles unprotected is not a manufacturing limitation. It is a product strategy. What is worth sitting with at the end of all of this is how long this knowledge has actually existed and how little of it reaches the people who need it most. Medieval craftsmen observed the effect in practice. 19th century scientists proved the mechanism in laboratories. Research institutions spent decades documenting the same finding across hundreds of independent studies. The compound that delivers the solution has been registered with the Environmental Protection Agency, sold commercially under multiple brand names, and has been available at hardware stores for years. None of that translated into the kind of routine public knowledge that would have saved millions of homeowners from replacements they never needed to face. The gap between what is known and what reaches ordinary people is not always the result of active suppression. Sometimes it is simply the result of who controls the information pathways and what interests are served by keeping certain knowledge circulating versus letting it quietly fade from view. A $1 solution that prevents a $20,000 problem will never generate the kind of marketing budget or institutional support that a $600 annual cleaning service can. It will never sponsor a home improvement segment or take out advertising in a trade publication. It will never be the centerpiece of a contractor consultation. It sits on a garden center shelf, unlabeled for the purpose most people need it for, next to products with far larger margins and far more aggressive distribution networks. And the roof above your head, right now, may be losing years of its lifespan because nobody in a position to tell you about zinc sulfate had a financial reason to do so. Now someone has. What you do with that is entirely up to you.